Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is a series of videos where we discuss ceiling fan trivia and history and technical information. I'm going to break one of my own rules again today, and we're going to talk about some topics where there are just as many questions as there are answers. And the overarching topic is the Key Largo fan company and the other companies that seem to follow them around. So let's start with what we know. Key Largo was founded in 1979 as the Key Largo Rattan Company. The founder was Richard Markowitz, who already owned a leather factory in Haiti. And I find that interesting because later Key Largo fans have leather and rattan details, so that makes sense. In 1980, their first fan ads show up. Also in 1980, Richard Markowitz patented a bottom plate for ceiling fan motors that's similar to an Emerson long nose with the oval vents, little edging around the sides. Basically the same as a Homestead Universal or any other fan like that, but he patented that style in 1980. He also patented pretzel irons with no visible screw holes. There's not a lot of information about Key Largo between 80 and 82. 82 is when the model names first show up, like the Chaparral and the Arcaro, but also in 1982 they filed for bankruptcy. And that might have been because they knew what was coming. In 1983, they were sued by the U.S. Department of Labor for not paying their wages and things of that nature, just basically some shady accounting. And they were forbidden to ship their inventory. That's 83. So theoretically, all of their inventory was American-made fans in 83. So interestingly, 84 is when the imports show up. And we've seen the imports. They have the same style canopy, same style blades, but a spinner motor. The earlier ones have a similar bottom plate. Later ones have GE vent bottom plate. And those show up in 1984. In 1985, the company is involuntarily dissolved. The government basically said enough. But their fans continue to show up at Home Depot and other places for sale through 85 and even some into 86. Also through 1985 and 1986, there's a recall notice for their mounting brackets. And the recall notice, interestingly enough, is for Key Largo, Saff, and Homer fans. So that brings us to Saff, often referred to as Saff Enterprises or Saff Enterprise. I mentioned Homer. Homer and Saff are the same company. If you Google the address for Saff and the address for Homer, they're the same company, just two different names. So we'll get into that a little bit later. Sometimes also referred to as Unitex Saff, and I don't know the reference there. Also sometimes referred to as Staff's Legacy instead of Saff's, Staff's Legacy. And also some of the same fans were relabeled Christina, but I believe that's a separate company. But I'm just throwing that out there. A lot of the the ads that show up with these fans have those different names on them. So 1983, Saff first shows up as a fan company, but they're just relabeled Moss products. They're the Marco Polo and the Heirloom and all that, with the same names and same model numbers and same pictures, but it says Saff on them. 1984, they show up again as relabeled View fans, like the View fan Golden fan with the cast iron motor housing, the nut on the bottom, and 4 wood blades. That's referred to as a Saff ceiling fan in 1984, and it's always sold alongside Codep products, which I find interesting because Codep also sourced from View fan, Golden fan, whatever you want to call that supplier. It's also the first year the Unitex name shows up. In 1985, Saff is registered as a trademark in both US and Taiwan. However, there's no other evidence that they exist as a company. They were not incorporated in Taiwan. They were not incorporated in the US. The only documentation that they ever existed was that they registered the trademark. 1985 is also the first year that the fans show up labeled Homer. Okay, 1986, no change. 1987 is the last year of fans labeled Saff and Homer, and 1988 is the last year of fans labeled Unitex. Now, other than the first 2 years where the first year is Moss Heirlooms relabeled, the second year is View fans relabeled, 85 to 88, all the fans are the same. They're what we typically associate with being Saff fans. And here are some of the models. The Abbey, ABB EY, is an original copy. The legacy is a chaparral or a chaparral. I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced. And it's also referred to after Key Largo is dissolved. The legacy is also called the Key Largo. So it's clear what they were doing there. Atlanta is their name for an emperor. Polo is their name for an emperor hugger. Major is a plain hugger. Monarch is a cane hugger. Flush Mayfair looks like an original hugger, like a hugger with original vents. I've never seen that before. I'd be curious to see that. The Windsong is a top mount, which is interesting because, again, they were sold alongside Coat-Up, which had a GE vent Windsong. So, again, there's some questions raised there. And the DeVille is a 5-blade GE vent. The other interesting trivia that I found about Saff is that in 2011, Microsoft had to cite Saff's trademark because one of their little Windows spinny deals was too similar to the Saff logo. So I know a lot of collectors have been operating under the assumption that Saff was an OEM. We discussed them a little bit in one of my Asian manufacturer videos where I talked to people who dealt with the factories who said no, Saff was not an OEM. They sourced from other companies. And one of the guys that I talked to said that he remembered Saff being a importer that sourced from Viewfan. I found that really interesting because I'm like, these don't look like any Viewfan products. But again, the second year of Saff, they were clearly Viewfan products. So I think they were just an import company that sourced from a few different factories. The one that I had, the one that was clearly a Key Largo product with the wood light kit and everything else, I wasn't able to trace the OEM, but it looked very much to my eyes like a Commander. So I'm assuming that the import Key Largos that were brought in under the Saff name were in fact Commander products, but that's just a theory. I don't have proof of that. So the other thing that's interesting is when I first started researching them, and especially seeing all the recall notices that tied Key Largo, Saff, and Homer together, a lot of those recall notices were at Home Depot. Homer is a store brand for Home Depot. So my first thought was, okay, so after Key Largo went out of business, Home Depot said, we want to keep selling these fans. They went straight to the manufacturer, and they bought the same fans and they kept selling them, and they put their own name, Homer, on them. And where that falls apart is we know that Saff and Homer are the same company, and they both sold to other building centers besides just Home Depot. Now, a lot of the building centers that they sold at were bought out by Home Depot, but they also sold to a few that weren't, as well as department stores. So my running theory is that Saff and Homer were kind of like King of Fans. If you remember from, I believe it was the Moss video, King of Fans was founded as a company just so that Home Depot did not have to go through David Moss. They were tired of going through that middleman that was, his own company, and they wanted to go directly to the Asian manufacturers for their Hampton Bay fans. But you can't just go straight to the manufacturers unless the manufacturers have offices in the U.S. So that's how King of Fans was formed, so that Home Depot would have an intermediary to go through that wasn't Moss, and they could get the same fans that they were getting from Moss, but get them through their own people. So my running theory was that Saff was opened as that same company for Home Depot, for whoever, and just like King of Fans, they sold to more than Home Depot that they were doing as well. But it's just a theory. Again, what we do know is that they weren't an OEM, and there's literally no evidence that they existed as a company other than the trademark and other than obviously the fans show up. And so that is, I think, all we have on Saff. Now let's get into my favorite part of this story, which is you've probably seen Sirocco fans that look the same as Key Largos, that appear to be relabeled Key Largos. So, Sirocco was registered as a company in 1983 by John Galatono and Joseph Cafaro. I don't know how it's pronounced. I'm going to go with Cafaro. You may recall, in 1983, Key Largo was forbidden by the U.S. government to ship its inventory, which is coincidentally the same year that Sirocco was opened as a company. John Galatono and Joseph Cafaro are relatively famous Sicilian gangsters that had connections in running drugs from Colombia to New York. And if you Google either of those names, a lot of court cases will come up. And Sirocco as evidence in those court cases, only existed as a fan company as a cover for running drugs. So what it seems like, one of two things happened. Either when Key Largo was forbidden to ship its inventory, these guys bought it and say, here, let's buy this inventory and have a fan company and use this as a cover. Or, and I think this is more likely, that one of them knew somebody from Key Largo, Richard Markowitz, whoever, because again, cocaine was very heavily involved in the fan trade in the 80s, and that's the drug they were dealing. So they probably were already connected. And so Richard or somebody from Key Largo was like, hey, take this inventory and start your own fan company. And, and it was done. So anyhow, here's the timeline. In 1983, they show up as registered as a company to John Galatono and Joseph Cafaro. 1984, they show up in ads without pictures. 1985, nothing. 1986, they show up in ads again as a cross between, like, they look like similar to a Key Largo and a Calcutta. 1987 to 88, they're mentioned in ads again, no pictures. So they have a very small presence in terms of actually selling fans. In 1988, both John Galatono and Joseph Cafaro are busted for drug trafficking, confirmed to be Sicilian mobsters with ties to Colombia and New York. In 1989, the company is dissolved, and in 1993, Joseph, whose real name is Giuseppe Cafaro, is placed into the American Witness Protection Program. So, that is so much more interesting than I thought I was going to get to when researching Key Largo. Again, we have lots of questions remaining in terms of, I'm still trying to dig into the origins of Saff. Very little shows up on Homer at all. I did dig into the origins of Christina, and they appear to be completely unrelated, so they were just apparently relabeling some of the same fans. And we have pretty good information on Sirocco. I don't think there's really much else to learn about them. Would still like to learn some more about Key Largo. But again, what we have learned so far is very interesting, and I hope you thought so too, and I will see you back at the Workbench soon. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, notification bells and whistles and things.